Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support inspires us to create more captivating stories. Thank you for being part of our journey. We hope you enjoy today's tale. Let's dive in. I want to share a story that will both excite and horrify you. It's a tale I've carried as a burden for the past 9 years. Even now, I'm unsure of who I truly punish with my actions, my ex-wife and her lover, or myself. To help you understand my situation and inner turmoil, I need to start with my background. I grew up in a family with strong moral values. From an early age, my parents instilled in me the importance of honesty, fairness, and decency. Fortunately, I excelled in many areas. I could complete a year's school curriculum in just a few months. I actively pursued sports and became a boxing master by the age of 17. I also had a photographic memory, which made people see me as a rare talent. Since schoolwork came easily to me, I rarely attended classes. Instead, I spent my time running a small retail business, earning a decent income. My knack for success followed me into every field I tried. Coming from a family with several generations in the construction industry, I decided to continue the legacy. By the age of 18, I had my own construction company, a college education in progress, and even an apartment. Around this time, I experienced my first love and my first betrayal. After living together in my apartment for a year, my girlfriend cheated on me. When I confronted her, she justified her actions, saying that since we weren't married, it wasn't a big deal. But for me, betrayal was unforgivable. I remained calm and kept my emotions bottled up, though inside, I was falling apart. This marked the beginning of my inner breakdown. As time passed, my business flourished, and I began to change partners frequently. I immersed myself in studying women, their psychology, behaviors, habits, and character traits. By the age of 26, I could easily spot infidelity and lies. My experiences left me disillusioned, convinced that no one was trustworthy. Despite my efforts to find the one, I only encountered women who were interested in my money or unwilling to commit to a family. Eventually, I decided to shift my approach. Instead of seeking perfection, I sought someone who had endured betrayal, just as I had. I bought a cheap, run-down car and started visiting places that felt familiar to my darker emotions. Parks, riversides, and quiet spots where I could reflect. And then I met her. Her name was Victoria. She was 6 years younger than me, just 22. We struck up a conversation, and after a few meetings, she opened up about her life. Victoria had grown up in an orphanage and had no family to call her own. Over time, I realized that I was falling in love again, and this time, it felt mutual. After dating for a while, I proposed to her in the same place where we first met. She was overjoyed, and when she accepted, I shared the truth about my life, that I was successful and financially stable. This revelation seemed to elevate me in her eyes. We married and enjoyed a blissful 7 years together. I can honestly say I'd never been happier. Victoria gave me love, support, and affection. I trusted her completely and never doubted her loyalty. But I was wrong, so terribly wrong. 2 years before the incident that shattered my life, I met a woman named Irene in a hardware store. She was speaking to another woman about needing a job in accounting. Coincidentally, I was looking for an accountant for my company at the time. I offered her the position, and she accepted immediately. Irene had recently moved to our state with her husband, George. Irene turned out to be an excellent employee. A few months later, I needed a full-time designer, and Irene suggested her husband for the role. George successfully completed 2 trial projects, and I hired him. By then, I was also in the process of building my dream house. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. My business was thriving, my home was coming together, and life felt perfect. But as the interior design phase of my home approached, the cracks in this perfect picture began to show. I assigned the interior design work to George without hesitation, since my wife was eager to create our dream home. I let her oversee the entire process, which turned out to be my greatest mistake. Periodically, she would visit the house for 2 or 3 hours to discuss design details with George. At first, I joined them occasionally to share my thoughts, but eventually, I entrusted the project entirely to her. During this time, I noticed nothing unusual. Our life continued as normal. We shared intimate moments, affectionate words, and declarations of love. Or perhaps I was simply blind. One day, I stopped by the house unexpectedly and noticed something strange: a rumpled blanket on the floor in one of the upstairs rooms. At first, I couldn't imagine my wife being unfaithful. I assumed someone might have been sneaking into the empty house at night to sleep. Without overthinking it, I bought hidden surveillance cameras, installed them in that room, and planned to deal with the so-called intruder later. I didn't mention it to my wife to avoid worrying her unnecessarily. A week later, I reviewed the footage, and what I saw shattered my heart into pieces. My wife, the woman I trusted completely, was in that room with George, doing things I could barely bring myself to watch. She then came home and acted as if everything was perfectly normal. How could she do this to me? She had opened up to me about her own painful experience of betrayal, yet here she was, crossing every line. It was true what they said: there's only one step from love to hate. Overcome with rage and pain, I got into my car, initially wanting to end it all. But then, my cold-blooded nature took over, fueled by hatred. I realized that sorting things out wasn't enough. I needed to destroy them morally, to make them unfit for society. I became consumed with the idea of revenge. With years of connections across various fields, I gathered everything I needed for my plan. At that moment, I didn't care what would happen to me. My world had been crushed, and everything I had worked for seemed meaningless. I discovered the next time my wife and George would visit the house. On that day, I prepared myself and hid in the attic, waiting for them. After a couple of hours, I heard the sounds of their affair. I stormed into the room and became a man possessed. With one punch, I knocked George unconscious. My wife screamed in terror, unable to recognize the man she thought she knew. I turned to her, and in my fury, I knocked her out as well. It was the first time I had ever raised a hand against a woman. What happened next was horrifying. A surgeon friend had provided me with a strong anesthetic, medical supplies, and instructions. I had studied the process thoroughly. Driven by rage, I performed a procedure that left George permanently disfigured. When my wife regained consciousness, I had already bandaged George and connected a catheter. She looked at me in horror, then at the knife in my hand, and then at George. She was terrified, thinking I would harm her next. She begged for mercy. I said nothing, only pointing at George, silently holding him accountable for everything. Initially, my plan had been to end my own life after completing my revenge, leaving them to live with the consequences. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, listening to my wife's whimpering and George's faint mumbling. Finally, I called a friend in law enforcement and confessed everything I had done. I didn't care about the consequences. My life, as I knew it, was over. My friend arrived with 3 mutual acquaintances. Without asking questions, he instructed one of them to take me home immediately while he and the others dealt with the situation. I didn't understand why at the time. Later, I learned that my friends had decided to protect me at all costs. One of them took George far away, ensuring he wouldn't return. Another showed the surveillance footage to George's wife, fabricating a story that he and my wife had stolen money from me before running away together. My law enforcement friend arranged for my wife to be admitted to a psychiatric clinic through his connections. My friends also helped me secure a retroactive divorce. Over the next year, they supported me as I tried to rebuild my life, though I remained hollow inside. About 6 months ago, I learned that Victoria had been discharged from the clinic 3 years ago and had joined a convent. As for George, I have no idea what became of him. 9 years have passed since that day, and I still live with the scars. I can no longer trust women, and while there are women in my life, I cannot envision a future involving love or family. The betrayal destroyed something deep within me, and I've never been able to recover. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. Your support means everything to me.